into the cloud. So we are going to record this portion of the day, as many people wanted to participate, but we'd like to get this recorded and sent to them later if they weren't able to attend. So yeah, as I was saying, these questions of how do you love in times of genocide? How do you love amidst racism, amidst sexism, against all the isms? How do we hold on to this concept of love? What does it actually mean? What does it look like in practice? What are our expectations? What are reasonable expectations? Annie, Joe was lifting up, the whole idea of we also need to protect ourselves, right? We need to have those boundaries. And I talked a little bit about the respectful defense that I'm sure you'll take us into. So, and again, our hope is that we are now going to get really much more deeply into this weeds in terms of the how to, as which we see as really fundamental skills for our times. I'm going to turn it over, though, to Karen to say a little bit about our agenda for this portion, to remind us of our working agreements, and then to introduce our guests.
Okay. And welcome back. Welcome back. And as Curtis said, this is our opportunity to spend more time, more deeply with Omri and Joe. So again, so grateful that you're here with us and sharing this journey with us. And as we shared earlier, and we share whenever we come together, Food Solutions New England, we're looking at how we are building our community and our community whole, acknowledging and embracing all of our full selves are invited to this table, invited to this room. And we have shared the community agreements that we bring forth for ways in how we will engage, communicate, grow together. And we always start with being curious, being open, being respectful, because we understand that conversations are much about listening as it is about talking, and maintaining an attitude of exploration and discovery, and being open to new ways of thinking and alternate ways of thinking, and so that our thinking becomes more whole, more embraced, more able to move again and becoming something different. And speaking from our own experience, using the I statements is so important that we acknowledge our lived experience, as well as inviting and making space for all of us to be able to do that same thing. So being considerate of others and welcoming that same authenticity coming forward. And being conscious of intent and impact, no matter what our intention, being responsible for the impact, and knowing that what I'm thinking and where I am right now is being received in different ways, and honoring that and respecting that. And again, as I always say, holding it close as we are on this journey of becoming something different and creating something different for our communities in food systems and all systems. And can't mention more and more and more, cannot say it again and again, is listen deeply. And listen for the new learning, because every single day we have the opportunity for new learning. We have to open and be able to take that in and listen for the commonality, even though it might sound, appear to be different. There's a place to make that connection so you can bring in, and looking for the points of intersection and belonging and the shared values in that always. Those are our community agreements. If we were in person, we would be, standing up, raising hands, etc., to say, yes, we embrace these. Yet we are trusting that as you are with us today, that you are going to lean into these. If only for today, if only for our time together, we are grateful for that. Because we're so looking forward to the other part of our way we move through FS&E is our regrounding, getting us ready. We That's why we had the break there so we could pause, but it's also preparing us for entering into another phase of being together. So Curtis.
Yeah, just by way of maybe regrounding ourselves. Earlier, if you were with us, we shared the Food Solutions New England land acknowledgement. We did 3 Qigong exercises oriented toward creating peace in our body, and we did a few breaths. I thought what we do just here is just offer a stanza of poetry that if you've been in an FS&E space previously, these words will probably be familiar to you. It's also a stanza that I personally offer to every network that I work with at the outset and then periodically as that network evolves. And it's from William Stafford and his poem, A Ritual to Read to Each Other. And I do feel like it speaks to so much of the spirit of what we're about to wade into with Omri and with Joe. And it goes like this. If I don't know the kind of person you are, and you don't know the kind of person I am, then a pattern that others created will prevail. And following the wrong God home, we will miss our star. And I'm going to say it one more time, because as my former colleague, Mistanget Smith of the Black Land Project used to say, the first time we hear a poem, we may hear it in our head. The second time, we hear it in our hearts. So one more time. If I don't know the kind of person you are, and you don't know the kind of person I am, then a pattern that others created will prevail in the world. And following the wrong God's home, we will miss our star.
Thank you, Curtis.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, so opportunity, time now to invite Omri and Joe to take us, bring us, walk with us. And just wanted to share a little bit about them. And then, of course, Joe and Omri, I want you to have some time to share what introduction you'd like to lead us in. So Omri is born in Topeka, Kansas, has worked and lived in US and Brazil, and currently lives in Brazil, Switzerland with his wife Martina, and their 3 children. As CEO of Inclusion Wins. Okay. I shared earlier that when I hear sirens of emergency vehicles, I pause and give a prayer for those healing and care to envelop them. So I will start again. Born in Topeka, Kansas, Henri has worked and lived in the United States and Brazil, and currently lives in Basel, Switzerland with his wife, Martina, and their 3 children. As CEO in Inclusion Wins, Omri is growing a consulting practice focused on generative inclusive systems design, cultural intelligence, social capital, and creating shared value between organizations. Before starting Inclusion Wins, Omri was global head of cultural intelligence and inclusion at the research division of Novartis, where he took a dialogue approach to foster the openings of minds and to deepen the skill sets with organizational stakeholders at all levels, enabling them to thrive and optimally contribute to one another in their respective organizations. And Joe Weston was born in Queens, New York, and founded the Weston Network in 2018 with a goal of fostering cultures of respect, civility, and mutual empowerment. He had the inspiration to do so after having lived and worked in the Netherlands for 18 years, coaching individuals and leading workshops and trainings for companies in various parts of the world. Joe has also done work with inmates, veterans, and women's rights groups in Middle East. Once back in the United States, Joe offered his first respective confrontation workshop. And soon nonprofits and companies like NASA, World Bank, and Oxfam began commissioning Joe to share his methodology with their staff and executives. And this quickly led to the expansion of the network of respectful confrontation practitioners, certified trainers, collaborators, and allies. Joe's most recent book is Fierce Civility, Transforming Our Global Culture with Polarization to Lasting Peace. And Joe is and his international team of the Weston Network provides training, consultation, and coaching for individuals, groups, and leaders and organizations around the world. Those are bios that are just, I'd say, small snapshots of the contributions, the works of both Omri and Joe to our becoming and understanding what civility is and the fierce love is in doing all of this mission work that we're engaged. So, Omri, I'd love to ask you to share anything in terms of a bit more about yourself that you want us to hold in our heads as we begin our conversation. Heads and hearts.
Yeah, this is
Heads and
always
hearts.
thank you, Karen. This is always the most difficult part for me, to be honest. There's so much that I I basically don't deserve in this world, that I've been given so much by so many for so long. And it's unearned. And that's the grace that I've been given, and I want to acknowledge that. You know, my a little bit about just coming from Topeka, Kansas. My mother is actually born in Kansas City, Kansas, and my grandparents, um, uh, particularly my grandmother's family, lived in right outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma in the early 1900s. And so you all can imagine what was going on in Tulsa, Oklahoma in the early 1900s after the First World War. And my family lived in Okmulgee, which is not so far from the Greenwood district of Tulsa. And family had land and businesses and a different way of protecting themselves than a lot of people found themselves in the situation in Tulsa. And so, you know, I came from a family that really embraced, when adversity came, how can we come together as community to overcome it? And so they were there during that time, eventually migrated rather to Kansas City, Kansas, where my mother grew up, one of 7 children. So I had a family that was always around. We lived all on the same block. My grandmother bought 50 acres of land in the 1940s. And so I was fortunate to be around this kind of nucleus that made community not just like theoretical to me. I saw how it was in my family, and it wasn't just my family by genetic lineage. It was family that was invited in from the churches that my grandparents were affiliated with, that was associated with people that were in that neighborhood. And I just saw a family that when somebody needed it, they got it. And that meant sometimes sacrifice by my grandparents, but it never occurred as such. So I've been extremely blessed, and that's a lineage that I think on both sides of my family was passed down. My father was a mortician. And so, my father's ministry was really caring for people when they were grieving in their most difficult times. And he did it with humor, and he did it with reverence, and he did it with care, and he did it with a high level of integrity. So, that's, if I could say that with all the people and all the things that have brought me to me and where I am today, that foundation is probably most important, and it's what carries me through what I do today. And I'm very blessed, to say the least, to have had that and to continue to be able to embody it, because it's been gifted. So I'll stop there with there's a lot more, but that's plenty, I think, to go on for now.
Thank you for that gift, for extending that gift. Joe, tell us a little bit of where you're bringing in. What are you bringing?
I'll share with you what I'm bringing in. I'm bringing it in. First of all, I want to say it's an honor to be in this space with the three of you, and the great gifts that you bring to the world, and to everyone who's here, assuming that you have a commitment to the well-being of others. So I want to thank you all for showing up and devoting your time to that. So the bodies of work that I've developed, that I've devoted my life to, one is called Respectful Confrontation, and the other is called Fierce Civility. And people often ask me, Joe, why are you so attracted to conflict? Why, what about love and all of that? And there is that. I have many things to say about that, but I start with, well, I come from Queens, New York, and New York every day is an examination of confrontation and conflict. So I was born into that, and that's where I learned a lot. I'm very grateful that I was born in Queens, to learn how to navigate being in a very small space with a lot of people, and you learn a lot of skills about that, about how to take care of yourself, how to set boundaries, how to respect others' boundaries, and how to just navigate and negotiate space. I also grew up in a pretty volatile, sometimes violent childhood, including my dad going to jail when I was around 12 years old. So I've always been curious, and one of the fundamental questions that has always followed me, and actually was a survival mechanism, the contemplation of this, is why is it, even though we know better, we have arguments and fights? And on a larger scale, crime and war and hunger and oppression. And most people would say that's just the way we are. And on some level, that is an accurate answer, but I was never satisfied with that answer. So that's what I bring, and seeing what my desire is, my hope is to support myself and others, having worked around the world in all different communities, to see that there are so many marvelous and remarkable people who are doing great work, want to do great work, and are not satisfied with the impact that they're having, or are not taking care of themselves in that. So both bodies of work is, in a sense, to help me and others find new upgraded strategies to have the impact that they want to have without having to burn out. And that has to include fierceness and in a respectful way, confronting, and to learn those skills, and to become fiercer and more effective, to achieve the goals that you want.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. So, Joe, and just in what you were saying, people asking you, why are you so drawn to conflict? What about love? And you said, well, there's that. I want to get into that just for a minute here. So, your two books, Respectful Confrontation, Civility, don't have love in the title, and yet I know you as a teacher, as a colleague, I know you exude what I would call love. And Omri, certainly seeing evidence of that every day, in the way that you interact with people, with a fierceness, right? Online, but also in our conversations. So wanted to ask you each to the extent that love is a word that resonates, what does that mean to you, and what does it have to do with this work that you feel called to do in the world? And asking you, Joe, that question first.
Ah, okay. Um, I tend to resonate more towards the word compassion.
Mm.
I think that's it. I was hoping to hear from Omri first because I'd like to learn about love. um, and they are definitely cousins, or if they're not the same thing, but just from a different reflection. But I don't use the word love because often, even though it is all about love, because of all of the misconceptions about it. And I talk about fierce compassion and the different layers of that, and cultivating the compassionate heart where we can train ourselves, literally train ourselves to be able to have compassion for more beings, not just those we like, but maybe even for adversaries, and certainly for strangers, is that we can increase that capacity. And I borrow a definition from I have my tradition in Tibetan Buddhism that I've been studying and practicing now since 1994 with my teacher, Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Geshe Sonam Gyaltsen. The definitions of love and compassion in the Buddhist teachings is that love is the desire to make others happy and acting on that desire. And compassion is the desire to alleviate the suffering of others and acting on that desire. And for me, that's how I can step into love and compassion as an action, as an assignment, in a sense, as the desire to cultivate truly authentic desire to make others happy and to alleviate suffering, and then finding strategies to act on it. Yeah, and again, whether it's love or compassion, every situation requires a different flavor of love or compassion, and sometimes it can be very nurturing. Sometimes you need to be the nurturer, and Fierce Ability, I talk a lot about that how do we rewire our nervous systems from going from being aggressors and defenders to being protectors and nurturers. And for me, that's my commitment for every day, to walk through the world to see who do I encounter that I can bring nurturing to or protecting to. And and that helps me move away from defending and aggressing and fighting.
Mm.
And it's endless. And with the work that you're all doing, it's a combination of nurturing and protecting. And the why I'm attracted to conflict and confrontation is that just having a loving feeling isn't always going to work. Just being civil, according to the classic idea of old-fashioned idea of what civility is not going to work. How do we find a way to stay in integrity with our values and at the same time bring in a fierceness and a way of challenging that doesn't disempower the other, but disarms the other?
Mm.
So I'll leave it at that. And, now I'm curious to hear what Omri has to say.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Joe. Yeah, Omri.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, I just, I've said it before, but you've been doing this work around diversity, equity, inclusion, whatever we're calling it now, for a long, long time. You have seen a
Are you
lot.
saying that I'm old, Curtis?
Not at all. I'm saying you are wicked wise. And so yeah, how's this word love landing for you, with you, given the work you've been doing, what you're seeing now?
Yeah. When I saw this question, when you first sent them to us, I was a little in a place where I was like, wow, it's so many things, but it's mostly, embodied transformation. And so if you think about the notion of sublimation in chemistry, to go from a solid and not to go into the liquid form, but to go straight to a gas, that's a transformational dynamic. And the gas is oftentimes not something that you can see. And so it's a little bit of going from form to formlessness. And so there's certain kind of actions in love that we can see. But the real love that I would consider the love that we need toward transformation of some of the things that have gotten in our way of in the world of being of humanity and our ability to make sure that humanity stays top of mind is it's formless. We need that. And so if we can be in that space of transformation and we can go from these forms of love where we're in action, which we must be, and sometimes that action is fierce. Sometimes that action is no, that's not who we are. I'll give you an example. It was from a mistake I made. I was having a conversation with a dear colleague. We were business partners at the time, and our business relationship was falling apart. And so when situations start falling apart, we oftentimes just have this outer shell that we're trying to protect whatever thing we feel like we might be losing. So both of us were in that space. And we were having a conversation at the time. Their business was based in their home. So we were sitting in her kitchen. It was a husband and wife couple, but we were sitting in their kitchen and she was talking to me about something that I had just experienced on a trip to do a couple pitches for clients. We didn't get any of the business, and they thought if one of them would have gone with me, which I was like, you don't need to, we would have gotten the business. And I was like, okay, maybe yes, maybe no, but what's the point? And so it felt like a bit of an attack. I don't think that was her intention, but that's how it occurred. And I remember her talking to me, and I became indifferent. And I'd never understood what it meant to be indifferent, given all the grace I've had, all the spiritual mentoring, coaching, teaching kind of pouring into me that I've had, that at that moment, I lost who I was in the space of embodied love, and I went indifferent. And at that point, I was like, indifference to me is the opposite of love, because she started crying. I don't know where it came from, but I do know at the same time that it came from what I usually felt like I was embodying on a consistent basis. I wasn't. I was empty to her. And that is absolutely not who I am. And at that moment, I said, I can never do that again. I just can't. I'm not allowed to. It sometimes brings back emotions today, because I'm like, wow, how can you go there like so quickly? And it called to my attention that people go there, that they detach from that which they fundamentally are, into a space where their kind of desire for protecting themselves is overwhelming that so much that they go back to the form instead of the formlessness. And so I said, I was in a form, focused on the form, focused on what I wanted, focused on being right, focused on winning. And I thought that being indifferent got me there, and it absolutely floored me. We ended up not having a business relationship anymore, but I was able to reestablish my love with that couple until this day. Right. So I think when I think about love, at first, when you sent me, I was like, what's love? And I'm in Switzerland, and I thought about Tina Turner. But I let that one go. And then I said, it's something that I was working on a couple talks around the beloved community over the past couple months. And I know Curtis and probably Karen and maybe a lot of people on here are a big followers of Howard Thurman. And because I went to Morehouse College, I claimed Thurman a little like I claimed Dr. King. So it's a little ego in there, but I claim them because I have so much reverence for them. But Dr. Thurman's talk, I started rereading Jesus and the Beloved Community. And so every time I read that, he says love a few times in that book, but it doesn't matter if he ever says it. And so when Joe talked about, I don't use love, I don't think if we're embodying it, if we're manifesting it, if our intention is that kind of formlessness, that formless love, all of the stuff that we see on the outside will reflect it, but what will be left, because you could, I think you had some quotes about you can do certain things, but it's not necessary, it's empty because it doesn't have love in it. I think it's came from Dr. King. That's exactly what happens. You could say all the love in the world, and your actions can be all the actions that seem like they're loving, but in reality, they're without the formlessness part of it, and therefore can't manifest in the hearts of others, and you can't have that heart-to-heart connection.
Mm.
And so, after reading Jesus in the Beloved Community, that kind of brought that back to me. And then I also just to conclude here, I was watching something from Brother Cornell, Dr. Cornell West, and I can't do his voice, so I'm not going to do it any justice. But he said that the common denominator of love is the unconditional, unequivocal commitment to the welfare of the so-called other. I use so-called, that's my language, because I don't other, that notion of othering is, and in my book, I actually have a chapter called Rooting for Them Out. So that notion of them or other, I don't necessarily kind of process it the same way as maybe some others do, but that unequivocal unconditional commitment to the welfare of others, to the other. And so when I talk about that as the common denominator of love from Dr. West, that all kind of comes together as a formlessness and something that's not something that we can create. It's something that's naturally, I believe, in all of us.
Mm. 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 Powerful reflections. And we're just getting started.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thinking about the nurture and protect and that combination of constantly doing both and is what I would say. And then formlessness. I mean, the formlessness means that you can go in and out and expand and contract at will, right? Intentionally, really thinking about it. Of I'm always whole self in that movement, in that action, and just thinking back to the words love and civility. Right? We've heard it, and you've mentioned this, Joe, as well, in terms of you don't use the word because it's so complex in terms of who is speaking it, who is feeling it, who is communicating it. And we also look at civility in so much the same way in terms of who is and who isn't, and what it does mean, and how does it feel, what does it look like for me. And so just wondering, in your movement through the world, for those who say love is meek and civility is somehow giving in, right? How would you respond to that? And when I say respond, it's also taking the beyond just that space, right? But beyond. Omri, I'm gonna ask you to share, and then Joe.
When I think about civility, I don't have the sophistication. I haven't had a chance to read Joe's book, but now that Joe's explained it how he has, and I've been following him for a while, I'm ready to get in. Plus, seems to be an acolyte of those who love him, Bucky. So both are things that I'm really wanting to dig in. But civility to me is always about a space of kind of respect for our common humanity and doing the things that share that respect. Sometimes that means in doing so, you have to confront things that aren't comfortable. And so, to be civil is not to be polite and nice. to be civil is to understand that our humanity can't be compromised. The respect of who we are as humans and our identities can't be disrespected. It doesn't mean agreeing. It doesn't mean that I think you're right and or I think I'm right. It means that you know you should be holding civility as a interdependent pursuit. It's a way of existing in the world with each other, even throughout things that will create conflict. And I'm a firm believer in conflict, not in the violent sense, but I know sometimes it occurs as such. And so if you want civility, even in the space of what could be considered pretty horrendous circumstances, we can still manifest it. And I think there's what we've seen over the past few months with the past few years with the death of George Floyd, and then with more recently with the conflict in Gaza. You know, I think sometimes we've lost that civility. So we haven't necessarily been open. And so all of your ground rules that you put forth today, like we haven't done that. We haven't listened. We haven't kind of dove into the complexity. We haven't said, can I listen enough to be willing to be influenced by the so-called other? That's one of the ways I talk about inclusion. Are we willing to be influenced by them? I'm not saying that they're going to fully change my mind, or somebody else that I disagree with pretty quite a bit is going to change my mind on something, but I am willing to be influenced by them. And you know, I want to be able to hear from them, and that's part of that space of respect. That's part of that space of interdependence. That's part of that space of, you know, creating the right conditions for everybody to come forth and you know, make their contribution to the world and to the folks that you're in community with at that moment.
Omri, thank you. Being in community. And in that moment, Joe, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I'm really full with what's being said. I'm inspired and so much to say. And I'm gonna try to channel that and say, so um love and civility, and I'll include compassion in all of that, it to me is a practice. And we have to practice it because we are wired to be fighters, to fight and defend. It's our fight, flight, freeze response. It's just our biology. And we're now living in an age where I would say that, and maybe it's because of social media or whatever is unfolding, that the lack of civility is rewarded, and it's getting a lot more press. And maybe it is the media that it's a, you know, conflict is sexy, it sells, it brings in profit, and love and civility is not as profitable, it's not as sexy. And it's easy for us to be drawn in that. And I say that, you know, the system, the world system is doing a really good job of keeping us dysregulated and separate and isolated. And I say always that imagine the most revolutionary or rebellious thing that we can do is do self-care practices to stay regulated and commit to fiercely engaging with others and foster and cultivate relationship. Imagine that as a rebellious movement. And that in itself will not only nurture ourselves, but we would nurture others. And then we become stronger as allies instead of the ways in which the system is dysregulating us and separating us and having us pit each other against each other. So it starts with ourselves. It's a practice of self to cultivate where our beliefs and the things that we say all the time may not be in alignment with what's in our heart and our actions. And how many times I hear people say we're all one, but at the same time, not really understand the level of interdependence and interconnectedness. And if we are all one, you can't exclude certain people from that, whether you like it or not. Many different quotes, but Bayard Rustin says, we are all one. And if we don't know it, we will learn it the hard way. And we will learn it. And so love and civility is that practice of understanding that separation is a mental construct. The idea, if we truly believe that we are all one, with either just human beings or with all creatures or with the planet itself, whatever your belief system is, then that's true for everyone. There's no one excluded. And so how do we unfold all of that? How do we overcome our aversion for adversaries in a safe way? And most importantly, how do we overcome our indifference? Thank you, Omri, for bringing that up, to strangers or to those who harm us. And to do that, we first have to be fiercely loving and civil to ourselves, and at the same time challenge ourselves to overcome that and come more in alignment with our beliefs and our actions, so that we move through the world as that, what I call it, compassion in action. We aren't doing compassion in action, we are compassion in action. And in terms of civility, is that the level of lack of civility and the way that even in our friendships and how we harm each other and not even aware of it, the definition of civility ain't gonna match it, ain't gonna overcome it. And I'd just like to read to you, I've got it in my book, the dictionary definition of civility. Take a breath and listen. Cultured, courtesy, politeness, a polite act or expression characterized by taste, refinement, or restraint. Now, how is that going to overcome what we're seeing playing out in the world? First of all, it's a definition it's a colonial definition. It's based very much on what, I have this image of the Queen Victoria sitting and drinking tea when you think of that definition. And that is not going to match in a respectful and loving, a respectful way, the lack of civility we're seeing. So we have to redefine civility. We have to find a civility that is still in alignment with our best selves, and yet cultivates civility needs skills and strategies to meet the lack of civility head on, and in a sense answer the question, which is very much part of my work. How do you confront a bully without becoming a bully? How do you, I'll leave it at that. I'll take a breath and leave it at that.
No, that resonates so much. That because we've seen some bullies come along in the United States over the past few years, and what we've done is we've just kind of had a gut reaction to them to try to, if we had the space to bully them back, we would. And even the mindset of that manifests out in the world. So it isn't just about that one individual that happens to have a lot of power. It's about everything we do every single day and how it manifests even when we're not conscious of it. And so for me, that really hit me, to say, hey, look, you can't go there even when it seems like that's the way it is. Like if somebody comes at me, I need to come at them, right?
Yeah, Amory, and I would add to that, and that's what the power over system wants.
Yeah.
The power over system wants to draw us into that base level of lack of civility and become bullies, so that the world becomes a world of bullies. And to me, that's how I see it. I watch too many.
Versus what? Like on the flip side of that, power over versus power.
Power within to power with to power to. If you're going to fight a power over system, you're just feeding that power over system. So what's your strategy of shifting the dynamic of the power over structure, so that the individual has a different power relationship with the power over system? And the system that I use and that others use around the world is power within, cultivate that, then power with, and so that we have a stronger alliance to step into power too.
Wow.
So what you're both dialoguing about right now, I think that's what so many people are hungry for. I can hear a few voices. First, people saying, "Yep, but what's going on in X region in the world is inexcusable." Um, that what those people did on January 6th is, insurrection. That's dangerous. So Joe, you have done work in Gaza. You have done work with veterans. You've done work uh, in the prison system. Omri, you've been doing this work, and you've been seeing the trends. You've been seeing the backlash against critical race theory. God knows what you experience, in the room with people, in Europe, where there's rising authoritarianism in so many different places and spaces, where white supremacy is alive and well. So if somebody says to you, "Yeah, but," what's your response? And then how? How? Give us some tangible skills or steps that you keep in mind to confront what some people think is just not confrontable.
Mm.
And I'm going to ask you first, Omri.
Um, Something Joe said, I think, is probably the starting point. Is you have to do your own internal work, so you don't begin the process of manifesting something that isn't you out into the world as if it is. And so that personal work, whether you call it spiritual, mental, emotional work, whatever it might be, or any combination thereof, that's at the foundation of it. And I think that's you can't go into something very complex and difficult without doing your own self work, because you'll just project whatever you're feeling at that moment, whatever you haven't resolved, whatever you haven't built the assets to overcome traumatically. I firmly believe in post-traumatic growth. And I probably spend more time on how do we build those assets more than talking about the trauma itself. Because I think if you try to, resolve trauma with a foundation of trauma, it's a very hard thing to escape. It's kind of like a cycle of reincarnation. And I believe in reincarnation. So I don't want to be in those traps. Um, I think it's getting clear, and in my spiritual beliefs, and it's close to that of Buddhism, is what are called five virtues, five constant virtues that we all have: benevolence, trustworthiness, righteousness, wisdom, and propriety. And so what do we hold sacred? How do we engage with that sacredness of it, not for the sacredness outside? So any kind of external practice is to cultivate the internal practice, or the internal alchemy inside. The same with wisdom. Wisdom is not something that we own by ourselves. It's something that manifests because we have all of those that have come before and after us, and all of us have this that we manifest in our true nature. Our righteousness is not self-righteousness. Our righteousness is, have we manifested the heart that when we see something that's getting in the way of us thriving, and getting in the way of us being able to make our best contributions to each other, how do we engage with it in a way that is not passive, but is very clearly resolute, with care and love, knowing that we're all connected, and knowing that this externalness of our lives is still there, and it's still going to affect us. We're not going to be Buddha every single moment of the day. Um, and then, how do we build that faith so that we know that these things are going to be up and down, but who we are can be constant? And then benevolence or compassion, so that we can manifest it in everything we do, not just kind of in a in a kind of circumspect or just, because that's what I have to do versus this is who I am. And because I'm this is what I do. And that's what, when I talk about my colleague and me being indifferent, I was like, whoa, that's not who I am. I can't. I'm not allowed. I just can't. And so I think that self-work is at the heart of it. And I'm not saying that everybody has figured that out. I haven't figured it out, but I've spent a considerable amount of time in that space because I know if I don't, I'm not fortified to work with people in a way that when I see something that I have to address, that if I'm not fortified, I'll go in with a judgmental space rather than a compassionate one, or rather than a caring or loving one, or rather than a civil one. And so that, to me, that's at the heart, is can we manifest inside what we want to produce outside? And that means we have to do that work and seek out people that can help us do it. That's kind of I think that's at the foundation for me. I'll stop there. There's a few other things that I talk about, but I really want to hear from Joe. So.
Thank you, Omri. That's beautiful. I'm so happy to hear that. So that it has to start there. I mean, it sounds a bit cheesy, maybe. Not that you sound cheesy, Omri, but
I often do, so it's okay. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, yeah.
Ask
All
my
right.
teenagers. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now, I remember in the day when we used the word corny. Remember that? Does
Yeah,
anyone
yeah, I
remember
do.
that?
It's still around. It's still around.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I haven't heard it in a long time.
At least in
Okay.
this house.
I want to say I want to be very careful what I say, is that I think if we all took a moment to think of those people in this last century who have inspired us as great leaders in civil rights or in cultural transformation, every one of them has a spiritual practice and that they've committed to and that they've grown and learned from. Bayard Rustin, I bring in, who's a big hero of mine, his Quaker background, but also having studied with Gandhi, and he introducing Dr. Martin Luther King to Gandhi, and Nelson Mandela and Jimmy Carter. These are great people who have a strong faith, and I find oftentimes that might be missing at the moment in a lot of the civil rights movements now and things like that is taking time, because what you do there is you do cultivate more, understand the skills and practices of the heart, of love and compassion and civility. And and what if civility is simply a commitment to call others to their best selves? And that to me is what the fierce civility work is that we get caught up in our and to bridge it, from what Omri so beautifully said, is that another investigation is to go within and realize we're not gonna release ourselves of our external polarizations if we haven't looked at our own internal polarizations. And how and the ways in which create separation, because that's where we have power. We may not have power over the world, power over system now and what's unfolding, but we do have power over how we approach people and the ways that we see, the ways that we create separation and the ways that we label people. And that doesn't mean we have to like everyone. It simply means that if we want to be effective, we have to, the rigidity of our biases or how we see people and label people. I'm not going to say that they have to go away, but we've got to soften them. That's going to be more, it's got to be more porous so that we can be curious and open our hearts to curiosity and compassion, that someone that we might first perceive as an adversary, that they may not be an adversary. They may simply be someone who looks different or has different views. And if we can get past that, see that they can be the most powerful ally. And it's an important part in the fierce civility work is I have a 6-step pathway to hope. And one of the steps is finding alliances in surprising places. We are interconnected. We are interdependent. The situation is global. We can't extract ourselves, even though some people are still holding on to a very, medieval's a bit extreme, but idea of isolationism. I'll call it, I'll step into that. Medieval, I'll step into that. that I believe if we are going to see solutions, we must find alliances in surprising places.
Mm.
Because something I've been saying for decades now, if only hanging out with people who already agree with you were going to solve our world problems, we would have already solved our world problems. So stop thinking that that's the solution, and to realize that we have to cultivate skills and strategies to engage the people that are different. And one of the big internal polarizations to let go of, and this might be a very sensitive thing, is to think that because someone has harmed you, that you have the right to harm them. And as a white man, I know it's a tough thing to offer, and I'm still offering it, just in terms of the things I've seen around the world and the things that I've experienced myself with who I am. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm offering it as an investigation. Because the question is, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? Do you want to cause harm or do you want to be effective? Do you want to feed these people or do you want to hold on to what's right for you? So I'll take a pause there. I know I've got more, but I'll take a pause there. But if you want to get more into the specifics of the question around January 6th and Gaza, I can say other things as well, but I'll pause there for a moment.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And I'm thinking, Karen, that maybe what we could do is queue up the breakout groups for people to go in and
Yeah.
to digest a little bit and come back with any questions. And I'm sure there will be some questions. There are likely questions about the specifics and as applied to places like Gaza, as applied to, confronting white supremacy. And there was something that was whirling around in my head as you were just sharing, Joe. I guess, Karen, I'm curious just to bring you in here for a couple minutes. I know we hadn't talked about this, but just to make what Omri and Joe are talking about explicit as a connection to this food systems work that we do and a good number of people on this call are here doing. What's coming up for you, Karen, as you hear what Joe and Omri are saying and the connection to our work for just, sustainable, truly democratic food systems?
Oh, we don't have enough time.
Can
We don't have enough time.
you give us just a taste before we send people off?
Hey, but what I'm thinking, when I'm holding, it is, you were talking about the me piece, being able to be in touch and understand who I am and how I want to move through all of this, and recognizing that it's so important to be able to be in community. And what does that mean? And I think earlier there was conversation, and this is something I'd love for you all to speak about, is that in being in any relationship, that the hurt happens, right? And so recognizing that hurt people, you don't want to be a part of that. But how do you replenish? How do you repair? How do you heal to be able to go back in and stay in the movement, stay in the fight, stay in the struggle? Because I think that I'm thinking about this from a lot of my friends and colleagues and allies and accomplices, that this is hard work. This is hard work. The work of coming together, the shared values, the using our power and privilege wherever it is to, right? And in our case, it is to transform the food system in such a way that we feed all, we honor all. And it just, how do you maintain the beloved community, Omri? I think about that all the time, the beloved community. How do we nourish? How do we refuel? How do we, as we're connecting and reconnecting and breaking and healing, how do we do that? And it really is requiring the interconnection of us at every point to be able to hold each other, lift each other, tap into each other's spirits and strength. But I know that, and I'm looking for, we're always looking for how can we continue to move the continuum and continue to be whole, be nourished, and Joe, be protected, right? How do we do that? So I didn't answer a question. I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm mindful of like that you're going to go into groups, so I'll wait to respond individually, but I'd love to hear from the community because I don't know if it's the complexity of it says I can't say there's A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. I think there are some dimensions, some things that we could start on in a path, and I imagine the tools in Joe's book are one part, you know, certain ways on that path that are encompassing many things. So I think, you know, it would be good to hear from folks what they feel is getting in their way. Because some of it is a spontaneous response with your own self, you know, kind of groundedness in that response. And then doing that across and with community. So I can't say do boom, 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 because the context are right. And I think sometimes that's what people want. I can tell you a lot of people call me, so we need this, and this. We need a 13-point guide. And I'm like, oh, I don't do 13-point guides. Here's somebody that does. So that's not what we do, right? So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Amre. So in the spirit of this, and wanted to give you an opportunity, as I'm sure there's Curtis and we talk about this all the time, there's things in this moment of time that we have together, things that, you're learning and things that are being affirmed. And, there's certainly questions, and offerings as well that are coming up. So we want to spend a little time in small groups, Curtis.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I know some people had to step away at the top of the hour. A couple have joined since we turned to noon here in the Eastern time zone. So we'll break you out, and we're really hopeful that you'll go into these groups. Sometimes this catches people by surprise because they thought they were just going to be here to listen and spy. But we want you to engage. We want you to engage with one another because, again, this is our commitment as a network to continue to weave these connections. This is going to be the basis of everything we do going forward. So the question for y'all to discuss in your small groups for about 15 minutes is, what are you thinking? What are you learning? What's being affirmed? How are you being challenged so far? And then when we come back, we'll open it up for questions from you all for Omri and Joe. So sending you to those breakouts now. Joe and Omri, you might get invitations. You don't have to go if you want to stay with us. And seeing as other people are arriving, we might need to rearrange a few people if rooms are unevenly distributed, but you should be getting an invitation to join a group. Hoping you'll jump in. Trying to make sure I get everybody moved to a room. I'm doing the mixing and matching at this point. So again, let us know if you're not getting an invitation and you want to be in a room. I understand some people may not be in a space to be able to join, jump into a space. Let's see, I'm going to move people.
Yeah, please send me to one. I think I accidentally opted out.
You opted out? Okay.
Not on purpose.
Okay.
Not on purpose.
Not on purpose.
Oh, not on purpose.
Yeah, so just send me to a room, please.
Send you to a room. All right.
Yes, yes,
Go
yes.
to your room, Jim.
Go to your room.
Yes, yes,
Jim.
yes.
Moving Jennifer to room 6. Oh, 6. Mm,
How many minutes do they have in the room?
I have 15
Oh,
total.
Melanie needs help.
Melanie,
She's in 1 and asks for help.
she's in room 1.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in. Or do you want to jump in?
I couldn't help her. If it's tech, I can't help her. I'll go in. I'll be back.
She probably wants to know what the question is I'm guessing. All righty. Two people that are
And back. But they seem to be okay. There are several people there. I think you can tell that, Curtis. And they're dialoguing.
Yep.
So maybe Melanie was having difficulty getting in. Everybody find their places?
Yes, I think I've got everybody moved. Some people may be a little dizzy because they were in a small, I just want these groups bigger than 2. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That exhausted me. Just knowing you were doing that.
Yeah. It's one of those secret skills he has. He
Yeah.
shares every now and then.
Thank you all. This is
Thank
fun.
you.
Delightful.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me actually pause the recording.
That's yeah.
I'd
That's
like
where
to-
I am with it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. I don't know if it's the right time, but I wanted to add something to that. Can I say something to that?
Yeah, just to say that everybody is now back with us from their small groups. So those rooms have all closed. So y'all are stepping into a conversation that the 4 of us were having while you were in your small groups. Can you artfully parlay that into something that would relate to everybody here, Joe?
We were talking about cooking. That's what we were talking. No,
Hey, you're right, right.
and needlepoint. Yeah. No, I think Curtis, you know from my work that it's very important to be able to discern the difference between assessment and judgment.
Mm.
Right. So what you're talking to, I mean, you would better explain what we were talking about, but instead of that's a good assessment, what you've mentioned. It doesn't have to be judged, because if you look at it from a larger perspective, what they accomplished is all that they could have accomplished at that time.
Mhm.
And that the very thing that you're saying that was missing is what is it's our task
Our
that's
task.
been given to us. They
Yeah.
weren't supposed to do that part.
Yeah.
And we couldn't have done their part.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
our time to do this part, and to just honor them and assess that they may have missed that instead of judge them for it.
Joe, thank you for that. My thinking of it too is we were not there. Right. So things Omri started talking about, most of us don't even know those pieces happened.
Yeah.
And so we're only getting, we only get snapshots of any history. And depending on who is telling the history, right? So the narrator of it will not always have the fullest of story, but will tell the story as if it is the only story. And it really is important to understand that even standing here as we are now, our younger selves, if we were looking back at our younger selves, we would be making different decisions as our younger selves. So certainly those who came centuries ahead of us or decades ahead of us on any of these journeys. They probably today, if you were here today, any of them here today, they'd say, oh, what was I thinking? I could have, I had the opportunity, or I could have made the opportunity. But again,
Yeah.
I'm just recognizing that
Yeah.
we're in this moment with what knowledge we have at this moment, and to do the best we can with the knowledge, the skill, the community, as you said, in honor of Joe, in spirit of moving forward in that
Yeah.
magical way.
And with great honor and reverence for those who came before us, and the pain that they suffered in all movements, in all movements for liberation. Yeah.
Love and justice.
So we wanted to bring in some other voices here to give us a taste of what was going on in your small group discussion. And if there's a question you're sitting with, or a comment, a response, a connection that would provide more fodder for this big group, we'd love to hear it. So just inviting you either to share something in the chat or to raise your hand, as Christine Little is. Christine, please come on in.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering if y'all could speak a little bit to the intersection of power dynamics when we're talking about this work, because so often, especially in the US, this idea of, and I like the way that y'all define civility, but I don't think that's the broader, the most common definition, right? And so I feel like a lot of times this work is often places an undue burden on marginalized people with the civility and the love aspect. And so how do we as, like, I'm a white woman, I live in the Midwest, I'm pretty secure and everything. And so where's this balance of challenging those power dynamics of specifically like white supremacy and everything without, and with the genocide happening in Gaza, right? Like there's a lot of pressure on those who are being harmed the most to respond in a civil manner, or, like to not fight fire with fire, which I understand, but I also think that can place an undue burden on those people. And so I'm just wondering if you could like discuss that a little bit.
Joe,
I'll let you go with that one first, Joe. I need to kind of reflect on it. Yeah, because I need to talk about the power part of it, because you actually mentioned it before. I don't know how to respond right. I need to noodle on it a bit.
Yeah, I'm trying to see where I can go, and I'm hearing the specificity of the question. I don't know if I can get to the specificity right away. I'll just reiterate what I said, is that I mean, of course, there's the immediate thing of if you're in a situation where you're being bullied or you're being harmed, and how do you address that? And then there's the long-term transformation. And in terms of the system that I offered of how do you shift the power over system of starts with power within, power with, and power to. That's a long-term process. I think in every circumstance, it has to be approached with that moment, and how do you approach it? And one of there's a 4-part process that I offer. There's many things, but how do you get more collaborative buy-in? And the first step is regulating your nervous system, and I can say a lot about all of these. The second is meeting the other where they are. The third is creating a space of safety and trust. And the fourth is creating the conditions for collaborative buy-in. I think that part of love and civility is also common sense and strategic thinking. And what are your strategies to bring about transformation? Again, if I'm not addressing it specifically, maybe Omri can jump in at some point and maybe in another round, but this is what I'm feeling compelled to say. I remember one time I was invited in 2011. I was invited by the national team for the Occupy movement. It was getting more and more heated, where the police were getting more and more ready to jump in. And many of the Occupy leaders were being invited to the mayor's office and police, and they wanted strategies about how to approach them in a way that was going to be productive. And I remember being on that call, and one person said, "Well, the police are evil." And then the conversation went on, and and I could have let that go. And what one of the things in the fierce civility work is the power of the pivot. Is, when we find we're stuck in patterns or we're stuck in polarization, how can we pivot out of that? And I said respectfully to that person, I'd like to ask you a question. What are you gaining by seeing the police as evil? And it shook him. And he got back to me the next day and said, "Joe, that just transformed my whole view on how I approach civil rights and all of that." And in a sense, what I'm doing there is just inviting him into a deeper investigation of what he's doing. I'm appealing to his heart. And that if we want to see transformation, I loved what Omri brought up. It's an alchemical process. I talk a lot about the difference between change and transformation. I personally think it's aggressive to expect people to change. People don't change. They transform. Asking someone to be something they're not is not a nice thing. You wouldn't want someone to do that to you. But what you can do is to appeal to their heart and ask them to transform their viewpoints, habits, and patterns, and to invite them into that process of transforming their viewpoints, habits, and patterns. And that's a messy process. That's where it requires fierce love and fierce civility.
So Joe, just picking up on that, there's some stuff coming up in the chat here, which I think this gets to the heart of what we were talking about. In our group, I was referencing the work of Esther Arma in Emotional Justice, who brings this Black feminist perspective and critique to past and current movements for, let's call it, peace and reconciliation, where it feels like, the arrangement still leaves the fundamental structures the same. And Eloisa speaking, I think perhaps a bit to this when she mentions nonviolence and civility are often weaponized against the marginalized and the oppressed. So asking people to step into being nonviolent and civil is a way of just continuing to keep the oppression going. Curious how that lands for you, Omri.
What's the alternative to civility and nonviolence? And so, like, when I kind of pose a question like that, I don't know the answer. But if the alternative is a diametric opposite of incivility and violence, I don't want anything to do with that. Okay. So that's kind of number one. And I'm not thinking that that's the case, but that's how it could occur. Like, if we don't have that, then we must have the other. And then it comes to the conversation about, when I think about, like, the notion of marginalization and oppression, I think oftentimes we have a historical lens on that. And the historical lens oftentimes reduces it to a binary. Like, there are these people that are the oppressors and these people that are the oppressed. And to me, there's a nuance in that I think if we miss it, we won't be able to move anything towards evolution or transformation. It's not possible. But I do think it's possible to say, hey, look, it's not everybody. There's going to be some people that, you know, I remember reading something by Scott Peck that he says, he talks about the notion of evil, and evil is a form of laziness. It's a form where you're only concerned about your own well-being and good in the world. And that laziness kind of leads to that evil. And I fundamentally believe there's some laziness inside of us as humans that manifests itself as evil. And I know that I have some of it too. So how can I not think that other people that might have some of it, and, or maybe, but I don't even want to give it some type of measurement, like more or less. But you know, that laziness is there sometimes when it doesn't necessarily fit those who I have the greatest affinity with. And so like there's a dynamic that's, you know, kind of like an affinity sclerosis, that we want to be separate and our affinities are the right ones and those are the bad ones, and then therefore we are this and that, and they're that. And I just don't think it's helpful. And I'm not, I can't say I have an answer to it. But when I've been in situations in organizational life with power dynamics, most of the time the power dynamics of those that are considered subordinate and superior are often manifesting themselves because one has more information than the other, and they're not ever having the time to get together to figure out where their information ecosystem overlaps and how all of these things are influencing each other, so that they can, you know, convene on what's beneficial beyond this kind of narrow space that we might be stuck in now because of what we know and what you know, but not what we know collectively, have made sense of collectively. So if I was to say, if I was to deal with power dynamics, historically, the only way that power dynamics have gotten to a point where you could change something systemically is that for those who were the most powerful and those were the less powerful came together to find out kind of their equality in the eyes of the creator, and found that there was something that they could commit to, and that they could spend that time for a long period and get to something that could shift the system. It was never separation that created it. And I think there's a lot of times now that what we're pressing towards is the opposite of what actually creates the conditions for what we want. And so I don't have an answer. How do you change power dynamics? But the only thing I do know about it is it doesn't come through separation, one from the other, thinking that we're separate because somebody has more power than us. That's never going to go away. There's always going to be more power, some people with more power than others. It doesn't have to be oppressive. It can be power with, and people that have that power. And I believe there are people that have power that have used it for good. And there are other people that have considerable amounts of power that will use it for good. And there will be some principalities and people that use their power for evil means. And we have to keep recognizing that and build the assets with those who want to do it in good faith and in towards what you know we know as the beloved community. Not everybody's going to do it, but I think there's enough of us that will. And you know, it's hard for me to say this is the way, because I have no idea. But we can't begin to have animosity towards humans because of their identity or because of their politics or because of their wealth or lack thereof, and think that we're going to transform anything. It's absolutely impossible. And that's what I get. If I was to say I get worried about something in the world, it's that. Like, we can't do that. It's just like me being indifferent towards my colleague. That's a microcosm of it, but we can't.
Well, and it gets especially hairy, and I want to make sure that we bring in Elizabeth and Jason, who both had hands raised. But you know, if you read things like Foreign Affairs Magazine, and the misinformation campaigns are just going to continue and escalate, and so the tendency to make abstractions of one another, it feels like we're just the danger of that just growing is real. And so thinking about where are we getting our sources of information about one another, about situations, I think it's a really good critical question to ask. And that's something I really appreciate about you, Omri, is when people make declarations about everybody's turning away from DEI, all X people of certain identity group are in danger. You're like, what's the evidence? What is the evidence, as opposed to just giving into the outrage? Doesn't mean it's not true, but you're one of the few voices who's doing some fact checking, which is really important. Elizabeth Bodnar, please, and then Jason Knoll, please come in.
So our group discussion led to a lot of about how we, and I don't mean to be presumptive, but I would assume a lot of people that, responded to a call for fierce love and civility tend to be the type of people that really lead with their heart and are bringing love and compassion into their personal lives and their individual dynamics and work situations. And oftentimes these people end up hurt, emotionally wounded, and trying to navigate those spaces and having to go back and regroup and lean into self-care. And a quote that a friend had shared with me a while ago was, I believe it's like a Bible verse, it's guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. So how does one navigate that duality of leading with the heart and also guarding it so that you can remain in a space that you continue to bring that forward?
Can I take that one? Thank you. And I love the question. Thank you. And yeah, I would love to just have a clinic to take care of all the open-hearted people who are doing such great work and just love them back to themselves and nurture them. So maybe we can plan that, work that out. I think that is important. And so most of my work, about all of my work, is based on martial arts, particularly Tai Chi, and more the arts that where you learn how to defend yourself and you learn how to deflect energy, get out of the way of of aggression, an aggressive, whether it's words or whatever, and learn how to actually eventually, with skill and strategy, make use of that force to get into deeper collaboration. The work that I do, Curtis knows very well, is very embodied in that way of rewiring the nervous system to be able to manage higher levels of resistance and levels and understanding levels of aggression. So the answer starts with love and civility is also skill and strategy, and to approach things from a strategic place. And one thing that I do say is understanding the transformational power of the heart and trusting that if you're just seeing love as just from being chronically nice, I'm going to give a whole talk on chronic niceness and how it's harming ourselves and others, and see that love is a powerful force and not an abstract powerful force, but actually you can manifest that. Omri, I love what you say. You started with alchemy. If anyone starts with alchemy, I'm a big fan. So the alchemical process of the transformation of the heart. And I'll give an example, and then I'll give a how to do it. Well, one thing is, this work is about appealing to the heart. And I remember coaching someone who was struggling with where she had to go back for Thanksgiving or something with her uncle and her family, who were obviously who were not of the same political persuasion, let's say. And I was role playing with her, and the essence that if you get stuck in all of the intellectual stuff, then you're just going to burn yourself out. You're going to get harmed. But there was a moment when she tapped into her vulnerability, which in my system it's in your vulnerability that your true power is revealed. And she looked in the role play at her uncle, who she loved very much, and she says, "I miss you."
Mm.
That in the midst of all the fighting about politics and gender and race and all of it and economics, she just stopped for a moment, took a breath, and said, "Uncle, I miss you. I miss how we were." And that just cut through it all. And that's not giving anything away. That's actually calling them back to their best self. And that shifted everything. And that they may never get to a point where they're going to see politics the same way, but it woke them up I'm sorry to bring up this image, but it's like, for those of you who've seen the Barbie movie, it's how what if love and civility is us waking people up out of this dream that we're in, that it's supposed to be polarized. It's supposed to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. And what I always say is that the power of this is our open-heartedness, is how much we can resonate from our hearts. And unfortunately, for many of us, we think that in our polarized way of thinking, we think that if we say open our heart, it has to be 100% open. And that should not happen. I'm saying this now very clearly. Do not open your heart 100%. It's not healthy, particularly in this day and age. But unfortunately, if we think that there's just two choices, either totally open or totally closed, so many of us are choosing closed. And that's what we're seeing, is that even though we want to do better, and I would say maybe that's a way of saying of Omri's experience, we're closing our hearts, and that's not going to bring about transformation. So I always say having this idea of totally open or totally closed is like an on-off switch. And what we advocate for in our work is to get rid of the on-off switch and upgrade to a dimmer switch, where you can determine in any moment how open your heart can be. And the formula is you should never open your heart any more than your level of safety. So that this work of fierce love and fierce civility starts with you establishing in every moment how safe you are feeling in that moment. Not uncomfortable, because the process of transformation is always uncomfortable, and we have to train ourselves to be more skillful in the uncomfortable. But to determine in that moment, how safe do I feel? And if you are feeling in that moment with whoever you're with, that your heart is open, that you feel 60% safe, then you should never open your heart more than 60% in your dimmer switch. And if you are with more challenging people, stuck in oppression or the power dynamics, and you might need to dial it down to 3%. But here's the thing. Even if your heart is open 1%, it's still open. And even with 1% your heart being open, you've just increased the possibility of new solutions and reconciliation and healing by 1%, as opposed to when our hearts are closed. So it's about radical self-care of determining in every moment how safe you feel. And then you choose how much you wish to gift that person the power of your heart.
And
I'm
as
taking-
Leonard Cohen,
That was beautiful. Thank you.
yeah, I was hearing Leonard Cohen singing just then, of like, whatever crack that is, that's how the light gets in, right? Even if it's 3%, completely closed, no light, no opening, nothing to latch onto or connect to. Jason, you'll be our last question before we wrap up.
Great, thank you. When Elizabeth asked the question, I was like, oh, Joe's going to talk about the dimmer switch, because I remember you and I had that conversation many years ago, and it was so helpful, and I've never forgotten it, Joe. I mean, it's really just such a powerful tool. But I was reflecting on so much of this conversation, and there was something that I was gifted several months ago, and it was a little book small ebook on delicate activism, and so much of what we're doing is really sort of, and I've never considered myself an activist I never really understood why, until perhaps I read this little book on delicate activism, which speaks to, a lot of times when we become activists, we see, first of all, separation. And we see this fallacy, we believe in this fallacy that we're going to change the other. And when we live in that fallacy of that we're going to go out and change the other, that we actually, ultimately become ingrained and part of the system of othering and the separation. And so it can never work that way. And so the concept of delicate activism is to change myself. I change myself first, and in my changed self, I now show up differently for the, in the space of those who are around me, and the circumstances that I'm engaging with. And I think, Joe was, and part of this conversation has also led to, when I really change myself and open my heart in the appropriate way, I now open the space for for those others to show up differently in the conversation as well. And now we can make true progress towards, finding, the common ground that we're working towards, those things that matter to all of us. So I just want to kind of bring that in as a way of, I was feeling so much of this conversation aligned with that idea of changing myself first, and opening that space for others. Not that they are separate from us, but for the others to also shift and change.
Thank you, Jason. Based on that share, I'm wondering maybe we should move to just final thoughts from Omri and Joe for now. Clearly much more to discuss, and beyond discussing practice, right? So Omri, what would you leave us with to consider? And then Joe.
One, I want to thank the community. This is, I think we just kind of start cracking into the more difficult pieces of the conversation. And it's one that I quite honestly, I struggle with, because I, at my fundamental core is that notion of love. And I know sometimes it's hard, and it sometimes feels burdensome. And I know I'm privileged to even say that I can have, in a way, it's weird. I feel a bit of privilege to have and take some of that burden, because I stand on the shoulders of giants, and the burdens that those giants have taken on before me are so much more profound than I could ever imagine. And what they had to navigate is so far beyond what I can understand, even though I've read about it and I've watched videos. There's no way I can fully understand it. So when I sit in that space, I'm just like full of gratitude. And even when it hurts, and that's maybe a little bit masochistic, but it doesn't mean that I change from it, because it's absolutely how it occurs to me. So I think you all are probably familiar with the man who wrote the song that we all are familiar with, John Newton. John Newton was a slave trader, and he was English, and he had a revelation once that what he was doing was evil. And for a lot of us, we wouldn't necessarily forgive John Newton. We would say that he is evil and he's perpetually so. But John Newton, in his transformation to the ministry, Christian ministry in the UK, in Britain, Great Britain, he became an abolitionist, a fierce one, and he was the one that actually moved England before the US in 1833 to have the Slavery Abolition Act. So the English were ahead of the Americans in the abolition of slavery. John Newton was also a songwriter, and the song that he wrote goes a little bit like this. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Can we, given all the grace that we've been given, can we have that grace in our work? And even when it hurts, when it's painful, when it's difficult, it's hard for us to see the light, find that 1%, because we know that grace is there in everybody. even a wretch, as John Newton called himself, is worthy of it. It's undeserved, unearned favor, and we can all give it, and we all get it. And I hope that we can all manifest it in everything we do, even in both the times of joy as well as those of pain. So I appreciate again just the opportunity to be with you all, and Joe and Karen and Curtis. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
Wow, am I supposed to follow that? Um, from my heart, I appeal to your hearts to understand that the solution to our world problems is an appeal to the heart. We've got all the statistics, we've got all the data. There are many before us who have done all of the necessary work to get us to this point. The next step is our activism should be to get more of us to drop into our hearts. It sounds lofty, but if we see it from skill and strategy, it's not. To appeal to the hearts of others and to use common sense and logical thinking. What I mean by that is, how do we take the things that we say we believe and really live them, not just as abstract? So if we really believe that we are all one, then we have to come to the conclusion that there's no separation. If we really believe that there's no separation, then we have to believe that there's no indifference to the suffering of others. If we really believe that there's no indifference to the suffering of others, then there wouldn't be a single person on this planet who is hungry. And if we really believe that, then we look and see, why are people hungry? And then we come back to, it's an appeal to the heart. That the people who are indifferent to the hunger of others is somewhere lost in their own mental constructs and abstractions and conceptualizations in their heads. So our job then is to find a way to help them navigate back to their heart, where when they are there, they would be running to support people who are hungry. And I want to offer that as an image as we all drop deeper into our hearts and live from there in a way where we're safe, and call others to remind them, you're safe here. You're safe in your heart. And in fact, it's a glorious place to be for yourself and for those around you. There is a possibility that we will live on a planet where not a single human being is hungry.
Drinking that in. Well, friends, we are in our final 5 minutes here. And we want to thank you, Omri, and you, Joe, for being here, and everybody who's joined us. I mean, we're breathing rarefied air right now having this conversation. It is a privileged conversation, and it's a necessary one, right? It's a necessary one. Karen's going to help us build a bridge back to what's coming up for us in April. I'm going to share a little bit about other things coming our way through FS&E, and then Karen will close us out. So Karen, I will share my screen, and you want to say a little bit more about what's coming up in April?
More. So I spoke earlier about the 21-day challenge, and just really want to invite you in again, if this is the 10th time or the first time. It is a place for us to build our skill and will and understanding of how we are interconnected and interdependent, and on this journey to becoming something different, in lifting up and embracing and creating systems, because people create systems. Systems do not create people. We really need to own and lean into our power and privilege wherever it is, and share that. When we're in the challenge, it is opportunity to be in this community together. I call it solutionizing, moving forward, building strength, and all that in that important place. So April 1st to April 21st, and we have our challenge Fridays, the 5th, 12th, and 19th. Join us, and bring your knowledge, bring your skill, bring your compassion, commitment, and your love to us during that period of time. And Curtis, more.
Yeah, the other more we wanted to mention, at least for now, is that in a week's time, we will have our second of these 2 winter series sessions. This session, of course, focused on fierce love and civility. Our next session will focus on right relationship and just more powerful conversation. In that case, it will be with Geho Huaco, Norma Jacobs, who I was able to meet almost a year ago. She's a Longhouse faith keeper, elder of the Wolf Clan of the Cayuga Nation and the Great Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And if you have never heard an Indigenous elder speak, you must. You must. And she will be joined in an intergenerational conversation with Erica Wood, who has worked in our region doing food justice work, is a plant ecologist, and now studies very closely with Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer in New York State. So Karen and I will be in conversation with them about right relationship and what that has to do with food systems. And of course, it will connect to everything we've talked to today. So coming your way along with others, we certainly invite you to check out Food Solution New England's website. There's a pledge you can sign that invites you to align with our vision and values. And just stay in touch with us as we will strive to do the same with you. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Karen to close us with a closing reading.
Oh, thank you, Curtis. And Omri and Joe, thank you again and again with all our hearts for being with us and giving us the encouragement and the courage, the confidence and the strength to keep on keeping on in that love and civility, the fierce love and civility. I wanted to share a quote from James Baldwin. He was a novelist, an essayist, a playwright, and a civil rights activist. And it really speaks to where we are and where we're moving. And he said, "For nothing is fixed forever and forever. It's not fixed. The earth is always shifting, the light is always changing, the sea does not cease to grind down rock, and generations don't cease to be born. And we are responsible to them because we are the only witnesses they have. The sea rises, the light falls, lovers cling to each other, and children cling to us. The moment that we cease to hold each other, the moment we break faith with one another, the sea engulfs us and the light goes out. The moment we cease to hold each other, the moment we break faith with one another, the sea engulfs us and the light goes out." So we're being transformed. We've taken that on by just being in this room together, this brand new day, this good day, as we claimed it this morning. And just continue to be transformed and know that you're on the journey with others, with a shared value, a shared commitment to becoming something different in service of us all. In love, fierce love, and civility.
Thanks, everybody.
Why everybody in the world seems so divided? Why's everybody gotta hate each other? Who decided? If I took All the world's pride and all the world's money, wrapped it in a blanket and put it in a buggy. Could you see that maybe that baby is just the same as you are? You know, it's never been easy. Every day for everybody ain't breezy. And I hope you realize when you look into another person's eyes, you know today would be a very good day just to have a good day. You know today would be a very good day just to have a good day. With a little more love and a little more laughter, a little more good
Thanks,
vibes.
Elizabeth. Thanks, Eloisa.
Be a very good day just to have a good day.
It's a good day to decide to have a good day.
That's right.
All day.
Whew. All right, y'all.
You can stop recording now.
That's right.
Oh, thank you.